it's important for the success of Y Combinator to see people investing at a very, very early stage. And if it means to keep them happy so that they're investing in YC companies, they will do what it takes.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the BetaKit Podcast. I am Douglas Saltis, Editor-in-Chief of BetaKit, and this week we're talking about the small terms of service change that sent shockwaves across Canadian tech, as it was revealed that Y Combinator, a globally prominent U.S. technology accelerator, will no longer directly invest in Canadian-domiciled startups. The reaction to this news was immediate and launched 1,000 thought pieces and social posts saying things like, this is a huge blow to Canada, this is a big nothing burger, this is politically motivated, or perhaps simply formalizing what was inevitable. For his part, Y Combinator CEO, and I should mention Canadian, Garry Tan stated, where you are incorporated increases your access to capital. Now, is that the case? Or is this another instance of America applying economic force to undermine our country? To help me answer all of those questions, we have John Ruffalo, managing partner of Mavericks Private Equity, and a man who promised to never talk about this topic again, with the exception of this podcast episode. So, what is going on with Y Combinator in Canada? Let's dig in. The BetaKit Podcast is presented by Fasken Emerging Tech, supporting trailblazing startups, venture capital funds, and acquirers of high-growth tech companies for over 30 years. If you're curious about the health of Canada's tech M&A scene, well, you've found the right podcast, but you've got to check out Exit Insights. It's a first-of-its-kind report from Fasken's emerging technology and venture capital group that analyzes private M&A activity among VC-backed and high-growth tech companies. You'll learn how buyers and sellers are maximizing value, minimizing risk, and navigating one of the most vibrant tech ecosystems out there. Download your free copy of the report at fasken.com/en/tech-deal-study and let them know that BetaKit sent you.
Well, Doug, great chatting with you on this. And yes, this has been quite the uproar. So
it's been a bit of a week, sir.
It has been a week. So let me start off with the conclusion, and then you could poke at this.
Okay.
The Y Combinator's change is a nothing burger. That's not a slam at them whatsoever. I've invested in many of the companies. In fact, companies going into an incubator is largely a nothing burger as well, because the best companies have always not needed to go into an incubator. But that's not to suggest it's a disservice to either the folks who have gone in there or YC. In fact, YC has been the one that has withstood the test of time. So huge kudos to them. And YC is a business themselves, and they can do whatever the hell they want. But, I don't care. And it's really not anything meaningful to Canada. What I do care about, though, and this is what got me going, I started to see the reaction of particularly the young founders. And that's who I really care about. And they started getting very agitated of the exact narrative that you said, that basically, our data supports that if you are a U.S. domiciled company, you will raise 2 or 2.5 times more capital, and hence you will have days of wine and roses and everything's sweet smelling. And that is utter bullshit.
Okay, so it's a nothing burger, but also a lot of bullshit. And I think you're identifying why we've got to go through this, because there's the components of what were the changes, why they're happening, the reaction to it, and then finally, I think we should close on what really matters and what's really important here.
Correct.
But I want to set up some of the details for people who didn't see this, and just for context, this is by far our most popular story of 2026 already within a couple of days. It's And I think to your point of it, just like there's a lot of young entrepreneurs trying to figure out what they're doing with their lives and their companies and at the start of the year. And this is a globally prominent accelerator. Now, how much that matters, we're going to get into. But I want to lay out the specific details here in case you have not been paying attention and you're here for the conversation. So basically, Y Combinator has revised its standard deal terms to exclude Canada as a permitted country of investment. Implication here that Canadian startups who are aspiring to join the San Francisco-based startup accelerator will have to incorporate their companies elsewhere to apply and be accepted. Now, Y Combinator's standard deal terms webpage says it still invests in corporations based in the United States, alongside the Cayman Islands and Singapore, which I think we should get into why those are still included, not Canada. Those deal terms go on to state that if a startup is already incorporated in another country that is not one of those three, which were previously four, the startup needs to flip its corporate structure to have a parent company in one of those three countries. Now, Canada was on that list. It was one of four countries as recently as November of last year, according to Internet Archive versions of Y Combinator's website. That reference was removed basically by December 2025. So this is this has been, a terms of service change, a little website update, a little policy change snuck in at the end of 2025 that is becoming a huge point of conversation at the beginning of 2026. And before we get into the why the making the change, the reaction to it, John, can you just set a little expectation of like why Y Combinator matters or the level of prominence here? Maybe why founders are paying attention. Where does Y Combinator sit in, say, North America's startup ecosystem, if in intention, if not necessarily in impact?
YC, is really the only game in town in North America. Again, you could quibble on what the value of incubators are, but if you do value an incubator, frankly, all the Canadian ones have gone on the wayside. The only other one that was viewed as a bit of a competitor was Techstars, and that's gone sideways. Certainly has disappeared in Canada. So, the one thing that I really do like, and we've got the C100 that tries to replicate a little bit about it. Irrespective of your view, having connectivity in the United States and in particularly to the Silicon Valley ecosystem is of value. There's no question on that. And it does provide you with connectivity that you as a young founder may have difficulty doing. Doesn't mean you have to do it. And frankly, it's interestingly, the companies in Canada that had the greatest outcomes, and none of them did that. But if somebody has asked me, do you think I should go? I go, of course you should go.
I think it's a great point that when you say like outlier companies don't often fall into these kind of pipeline systems. But, if you look at YC's historical portfolio, there are some very recognizable
historically,
yes. And in that consolidation of incubators and accelerators, yes, Techstars has definitely struggled. There is no current Techstars Toronto in Canada. They're trying to restart it. It's really, Y Combinator, and then in a different approach, the Andreessen Horowitz A16 kind of speed run as the North American kind of programs and processes here. And the pitch seems to be, hey, early stage founders and startups, come in here. We're going to give you early access to capital. We're going to give you a network in the Valley. We're going to help you raise money following that. And we're going to get you set up for success, which, I think is very, very compelling to a lot of early stage founders who are looking to accelerate. Now, as you kind of noted off the top, Garry Tan has claimed previously, we covered this in 2025, and he, in response to this kerfuffle, has noted, Canadian companies that reincorporate in the U.S. raise funds at 2 to 2.5 times, depending on which Garry Tan tweet you reference, more than companies that don't. And he also said here, and I want to pull up the specifics because other publications frame this as Y Combinator is no longer investing in Canada. I think we were a little bit more clear in the framing. It's you have to not be a Canadian-domiciled company to receive YC investment, which is very different. And Garry Tan said,
different.
We fund tons of Canadians and Canadian startups, but if you're going to raise money, you should just go to convert to a Delaware C Corp. He again said the Canadians that stay in the USA raise more money. The ones that stay in SF after demo day become unicorns at 2.5 times the rate. And then probably the most important thing here from his commentary as it relates to just the broad message, we're not saying Canadians should leave Canada, which is weird because he is kind of saying it's great if they do.
He
But he is
does.
saying where you are incorporated increases your access to capital. That's it.
Well, that's
Now,
see, that's where the utter. So let's talk about that data first. Let's pick on that first of all.
okay.
And by the way, Garry is a good guy. I'm a fan of Garry. We did exchange messages on this. He didn't want to debate me because I know why he doesn't want to debate me, because there is no data. The data is anecdotal because it's justifying a narrative, and we'll talk later about what that narrative really is. And it took me a while to piece it all together. But first of all, I think it's, now again, don't quote me, over the 20-year time period is about 6,800 companies have gone to YC, of which 144, if I recall, in 20 years have been Canadian.
Yep.
The cohorts are very, very tiny. And so think about this, 144 companies in 20 years. Over 20 years, how many Canadian startups do you think there have been? Like, it's thousands and thousands. So already you're using an adverse selection of data, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, all, not some, but all of the great outcomes in Canada over the last 20 years have not been in Y Combinator. Shopify, Wealthsimple, Kepler, Cohere, Wabi, you list them all, not one of them. Again, not a disservice to the ones that did. So correlation versus causation here, first of all, is nonsensical, because what he's trying to say, or what he's implying, is if you really want to have this $1 billion success and be a unicorn, and he made reference to unicorn in one of the tweets,
Yep.
like, it's bullshit. It's not even true. So that's number one. Number two, what data are you actually grabbing? So let me just give you an example. If you have a Canadian company that goes there, I have funded some of those Canadian companies. Well, are you including my capital and the firms that I represented in there and all of the other Canadians in there? Are you only looking at US? What size of dollars are we talking about? It's interesting you say 2.5. What does that really mean? So instead of two comparative companies, one was raising $1 million and the other one got 2.5, is that what we're talking about? I have no idea. So to make these generalizations, I just show me the data. So the point is that I concluded on there, well, the narrative is full of shit. There's no question in my mind. I think everyone else is saying, so what is it really? And that was the second part of the analysis.
Okay, so we're noting off the top here that these claims of becoming unicorns at 2.5 times the rate, or receive 2x the success rate at various times, Garry's made those claims, dealing with both small sample size of Y Combinator data, which has featured a limited amount of Canadian companies. Now, that did pick up in the post-COVID environment, particularly when they were allowing for remote participants in cohorts, but really after 2021, 2022 has really dropped back down.
It's dropped a lot,
as you noted, to that. Now, again, are those Canadian companies that are Canadian incorporated versus, like, there's a thing we're going to get to here of just the number of Canadians that are just jumping on a plane to SF and maybe they're launching as US
That's
companies.
different,
so, like,
right? This is
Canadian
my concern.
associated founders, very different thing. But this is a small sample size with unclear terms, and obviously not reflective comparatively to the broad Canadian ecosystem. Correct. I don't think any of that was part of Garry's intention here. And it's not, well, while he has marketed the 2.5 return colloquially before, it's not like they've been putting out press releases about this, or they really advertise this change.
No.
But it goes
But it
back
was the
to,
but it was the narrative.
It is, yes. It is
the implied narrative, where you're right.
So I want to ask you really explicitly why Y Combinator made this change.
Okay.
Is it for the benefit of founders? Is it like, hey, when you do this, the math shows us that you get a better return. We want to encourage this. I've got a variety of takes here that I've
Sure.
accumulated from other people, but
Yeah.
I just want to hear from you specifically why you think this was done, because in your thoughtful LinkedIn post, which you said was the last time you're going to talk about it, so this is the after show on that LinkedIn post, you said that YC did this to benefit YC, and I would like
Correct.
to understand why you think
Sure.
that's the case.
So, by the way, there's nothing wrong with doing what's good for your business.
Mhm.
I'd embrace that. I would do the same thing. But don't create a narrative that's full of shit. That was my point. So, number one, YC is like the McDonald's uh, uh, franchise where you go to McDonald's and you say, hold the onions, the whole machine breaks down. One of the things that YC did very consciously years ago was trying to increase the velocity of the number of companies that are going there, really to increase their hit rate. Good, I get it. So what they're really trying to do is standardize as much as they can. It
Yes.
keeps the fees down, etc. So,
and there's a great op-ed piece that David Crow, who you're very familiar with, sir,
yep,
wrote for BetaKit about the institutionalization, which I think we were talking about the McDonald's fast foods, where it's the
right.
industrialized delivery of this stuff.
Industrially, exactly. In process, the assembly line, you could have any color of car you want as long as it's black, the old
Yeah.
Henry Ford. By the way, that's not a disparaging remark. That's why they're trying to scale. So I get that, number one. The second thing I want to say is there's founders in Canada, young founders, who may be making a decision to say, hey, look, I'm just going to move to the United States because I think it's better for my business.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. I'm saddened by it. But those are not the people who are the concern because they're already gone from Canada. And the moment that they're gone, I would be advising them. So now they've moved there and they intend to live there and build their company. They really should have a US based domiciled company, because if you have a Canadian one, you're going to run into a mess of issues. So let's ignore those. So these are the founders that want to remain and build in Canada, but want to raise capital in the United States.
This goes to the marketing messaging thing, and you have to remember this is a Canadian citizen who is now the CEO and president of Y Combinator, who is, if you follow his Twitter, always seems to be around crack Canadians who are going to SF by the droves. Might be a little bit of a marketing message here. And then the other component you're noting, as they're trying to standardize their terms and build a pipeline for scale, having Canadian domiciled companies is an additional burden here, or headache, or cost, right?
Yeah. So with this as a backdrop, so now you have to say, other than the standardization, which, by the way, is it true? Yes. Is it a big issue? No. But it is a standardization issue. But his comment was, in essence, there is a negative or an aversion by US based investors to invest in Canadian domiciled companies. So now let's break that down. And I'm going to divide this into two categories: individual angels and the institutions, which everyone really wants there, right? The Sequoias, the Andreessens, all those big names that if you truly want to scale and become a unicorn and get the big dollars, that's the one that everyone does talk about. Let's start with them first. Back in 2008, just before that, and this is the time that I was the global leader of Deloitte's technology practice from a tax perspective around the world. So I was dealing with this issue and it was killing me. There was this bizarre rule in Canada that if you are a US VC disposing at a gain a Canadian company, you are subject to Canadian tax. Now, the way to get around it is you file for this special certificate to try to get a waiver of this withholding.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are, many of these are structured as limited partnerships with thousands of investors.
Yep.
Canada required each limited partner or each investor to file one. It could be for any deal, thousands and thousands of these certificates. It was ridiculous. Only Canada did this, and it was bullshit. I spent 3 years lobbying the Canadian government, and in 2008, they finally listened to me, and we killed it. So it was now done, and we were trumpeting. So TechCrunch wrote a story at the beginning of, or sometime in 2010. It actually was referencing me and the global press release that I did to tell everybody,
Yes.
folks, it's all good. Shortly thereafter, I joined Omers and to build Omers Ventures. I had to go down between the time I was at Deloitte and Omers. I had to go down mano a mano with each of the major players from Andreessen down and said, guys, knock it off. The law changed. And they're like, oh, we didn't know that. And so I would say by around 2011, it was over and it was back to normal. Every US VC, and that's what's happened in the last 15 years.
Yeah, something that we haven't coming into my reporting in this space around that time, you would hear was a thing that there was some pressure and became less and less and less common. Still might happen, but certainly wasn't a demand or requirement. I'll note we talked to a bunch of other people around our reporting for the story this week, and including those who've just been posting publicly. And it's like, yes, the incorporate in Delaware narrative has been a thing. It is an ask. Institutional investors often like simplicity and clarity in their terms on this, and it's less of a financial headache or additional cost if you're just dealing with one set of tax laws and compliance. But we heard from many people that while U.S. institutional VCs might request this, they don't require it, because for about 15 years, it's been common knowledge that the reasons why they would require it initially because of some poorly thought out policies in the Canadian Income Tax Act no longer apply, right?
Correct.
We can establish that. So then this goes back to the question of why is YC requiring it if it has become just generally a preference, but not a deep-seated need based upon tax law. And I'm wondering if this ties into QSBS exemptions, John, and if you could explain to our audience what those are.
Yes. So you nailed it. So now we've established, by the way, I've done over 100 VC investments with US players. And you're right, way back when a few would make comment, but all of them co-invested in a Canadian-based company. So there is no issue. So then, and when you look at YC itself, it is largely backed by a lot of universities and endowments. Mm-hmm. And again, they don't have any issues. And I was scratching my head going, well, then what is it? And I was like, now the US has something almost like what Canada has. We have the capital gains exemption on the first $1.25 million that was the subject of liberal policy, the government policy in 2024 to increase it. And there's been a lot of proposals to mirror what the US has, and theirs is called the qualified small business stock exemption. But theirs applies not only to founders, but also to the investors of those businesses, not Canada. And unless you have certain size thresholds in Canada. But the big thing is the United States threshold is $10 million. And it's not a lifetime exemption like it is in Canada. It's on a per investment basis. So the QS, and you have to hold it for certain periods of time. And I can't remember now, but I think once you hold it for 5 years, the gain is 100% exempt up to your $10 million for that particular company. So you're making 10 investments, you got 10 million per, that's very lucrative.
That's very lucrative for a certain subset of potential investors who are
Yes.
maybe investing at the seed stage, the pre-seed stage,
Pre-seed and
or
seed,
the angel stage, right? Where
correct.
Yes. They won't likely in the $100 billion company valuation still be sticking around, but up to that $10 million number for the capital that they're putting in, that's right in their ballpark, and 100% exemption is really juicy for them, right?
Yeah. And by the way, that and in order to qualify for it, you must be an individual. Now, an individual directly or indirectly. So you either are an angel where you're investing in your own family office or high net worth, or if you're an investor in a seed or pre-seed fund, many of those investors are also individuals, in which case that benefit flows through them as well. So and again, it's known to be lucrative, but here is the one condition: it must be a U.S. domiciled company in order to qualify.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's the issue.
Okay.
So,
and it's the issue because these types of investors that benefit from that tax exemption have what kind of relationship with an incubator accelerator like Y Combinator? What's the connection here? Because I compared Y Combinator earlier to the Andreessen Horowitz A16 Speedrun, which is a different type of acceleration program, but backstopped by Andreessen Horowitz, which, if you are not familiar, has more money than Jesus. Y Combinator does do committed investments, but in terms of like follow on and extension, like they're relying upon a broader pool of investors to support these startups, correct?
Correct, because they're putting $500,000. Y Combinator puts in $500,000 for a 7% equity interest. They rely, like, I wouldn't say exclusively, but let's say practically exclusively, with the angel network or the pre-seed seed network that is backed by angels. So what Y Combinator is doing is, it's important for the success of Y Combinator to see people investing at a very, very early stage. And if it means to keep them happy so that they're investing in YC companies, they will do what it takes to make those investors happy, not to make the Canadian shareholder or investor happy, because that's irrelevant in this analysis.
Gotcha. Okay. So to summarize some of the motivations here, because I don't want to get too deep in the weeds of like tax law. That's not an entertaining podcast, but our audience needs to understand how these structural financial considerations flow through the ecosystem and help define and support and reinforce the decisions that founders are presented with, right? So we've got a circumstance here where Y Combinator, again, one of the few and most prominent accelerators left standing in North America, is looking to standardize and streamline its approach to bringing in a pipeline of startups. It is run by a Canadian who is seeing tons of cracked Canadians come to SF and understands the value of Canadian talent. And YC has an investment base that financially benefits from investing in not Canadian startups, but US domiciled startups. And if it is only investing in US domiciled startups predominantly, it streamlines a lot of additional legal fees and headaches in addition to the tax breaks. Is that kind of covers off a bunch of different motivations, right? So let me ask you then, why isn't it just US alone? Why did Canada get cut, but Y Combinator is keeping the Cayman Islands and Singapore?
So great question. So that's what got me going. It's like, hold on a minute. Well, the QSBS exemption does not apply if it's a Cayman. But what is in the Cayman? Oh, right. It's all of the crypto companies. And they're in the Cayman for obvious tax-free benefits, but more so, they're avoiding, I'm going to guess, U.S. regulatory issues around crypto. Could be the U.S. Genius Act, who knows? So what I found a little offensive then is like, but wait a minute, we still want the crypto folks. So yeah, so that rule that we just talked about in Canada, yeah, but you know what? We don't want to lose all crypto because crypto's hot right now. I bet you if this was a few years ago when crypto was in the shitter, that exemption for Cayman may not have been there. So that's number one. The second one was I thought, even a little more, suspect. So it's Singapore. So you'd look, what the heck is the magic of Singapore? Well, Singapore is the single most common jurisdiction. If you are a Chinese-based company and you do not want to look like a Chinese-based company, you create a Singapore head office, and then you'll have a Chinese subsidiary underneath. Now, China has some very, very hot companies that might want to go to YC. But if YC invests directly into Chinese companies, YC will find themselves probably on the wrong side of the US government. So what you do is that you obfuscate it by saying, no, these are Singapore companies. Yeah, we'll give up the QSBS, but China is hot too. So the rule is a rule, except let me override the rule because I want to deal with those hot companies. And who gives a shit about Canada? It's small and relatively speaking, so screw it on that basis.
Yeah.
So that is the likely reason why those two exemptions occurred.
And you kind of nailed on that part. So you've laid out the case for why Combinator is highly incentivized to still allow or support investment in domiciled Cayman Islands and Singapore companies, because they can't turn off the pipelines. But when it comes to Canada, there's this message and interest to just say, well, we can cut this off and we're not going to lose access to Canadian talent because they're kind of maybe coming here anyways, or we're not going to really suffer if we force them to redomicile.
And what was even said before is, hey, well, by the way, you could solve the problem. Just come here and move here because we've encouraged you that you're better off by staying here anyway. So maybe that's a disguised way of that just migrate the Canadian talent here, and we solved our problem.
Okay. I think we've kind of settled through why this might be happening. We still need to talk about the reaction to it and why it matters. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about this Canadian startup diaspora. And I'm going to ask John if there's another secret motivation as to why Y Combinator might be putting the screws to Canada. This week's episode of the BetaKit Podcast is brought to you by, drumroll please, the BetaKit newsletter. Every Sunday, BetaKit's flagship newsletter serves up in-depth analysis and insights on Canadian tech and innovation news, piping hot and straight to your inbox. Think of it as a podcast that you read with your eyeballs. With the BetaKit newsletter, you get crisp commentary on the news you need, top Canadian tech headlines of the week, events you actually care about attending, the week's juiciest deals, and exclusive news from BetaKit's partners. Deserves better, and so do you. Stay informed on all things Canadian tech by signing up for the BetaKit newsletter today at betakit.com/newsletter. All right, we're back. We've kind of walked through why YC might be doing this. Now we got to talk a little bit about the response and the reaction. There's been quite conversations about the different meaning behind this, which I set up off the top. I wonder if we could do a couple of these in compare and contrast, because I read a quote off the top that came from Shopify president Harley Finkelstein, basically saying that Y Combinator is formalizing what's inevitable, not causing it, which is very, very strong words, but points to this idea and something that you said in your write-up, John, that this decision has little to no impact on the Canadian innovation ecosystem.
Yes.
Can you explain that? Why that's the case, given how much people just seem to care about this?
Yeah, no, it's because I think people are conflating two different issues. The direct impact of not having Canadians in there, like I said, in this cohort, although there is officially 0 Canadian companies, I think there's a couple in this cohort, and yet there's hundreds or of new companies in Canada that are forming. So it just doesn't matter. But the conflating is, and this is where I got very troubled. Some of the young founders interpret it as, if we're not either in the United States physically and move there, or B, if we don't have a Canadian company, and they'll say, I want to stay in Canada, I better have a US company, in essence, pretend that I'm US, or I'm not going to get any fundraising. Now, there is where the truth is, and this is where now I'm sensitive. If Canada had a robust access to capital for these founders, they wouldn't give a crap. This is the problem. Doug, you and I had, I think our last podcast together was when I went apeshit on the whole capital gains situation on the budget.
There's a specific lever that we have in the BetaKit podcast studio that we pull whenever John Ruffalo needs to be summoned over some sort of circumstance that is existential to Canadian tech. And sometimes they are existential, and sometimes there's circumstances like this where we actually need to parse through what is the messaging and the marketing and what the real issues are. But yeah, it does seem we kind of pull that lever.
Yeah.
When everyone loses their shit online about something that's happening in Canadian tech.
So just like the US thing on the QSBS, our angels and small, seed and pre-seed funds who are getting individuals, the capital gains rate plays a big role. And, we have, aside from the capital gains exemption, it's 50% tax rates. And when the Liberal government at the time was messing with it, I said, you are going to kill the lifeblood. And basically you're opening the door and having all these kids leave. Mm-hmm. We have an access to capital issue here. And the problem with Canada, and in this geopolitical climate, we do not naturally form capital in this country. Maybe with a little bit of the exception of the province of Alberta, but we don't. And if you think that the panacea is going to be, capital is fungible and it's going to cross borders. Well, in a strained geopolitical world, people start to build up their borders more strongly. And this is why I have been putting pressure from a policy perspective that Canada actually has massive capital pools. They're just not unloading them for Canadian-based risk capital. And that's the real issue. And that's what these young founders are really complaining about. They're not saying, I want to leave Canada. Some of them do, but a lot of them are not. They're saying, I've got no choice but to leave Canada. Yeah. And now you get someone like Combinator who's got high credibility. They're telling me that I'm right. Well, they're doing it for
you're right, and that you're going to do better, and you'll be welcomed here, and they're going to set you up, right? Like you should know, early, at the end of last year on the podcast, we had Colair co-founder Neen Abdi, who hasn't joined Y Combinator, but was pulled down to the valley by another VC firm that was just like, here's the money, here's some customers, get building. And to your point, John, like the access to capital issue, but like speed of deployment issue, contrasted that to experience. This was a UW engineering student, that working on SaaS in the hardware engineering space, as cracked as you can be, in the right university programs, and comparing interesting experience where they were trying to do like University of Waterloo velocity pitch competitions for $25K, and they've got US investors just handing them $1 million saying, come down and build. They come back to visit Canada, and they're overhearing Canadian VCs and Canadian ecosystem members talking about young founders like themselves as if they're playing CEO. And in SF, they're not treated as if they're, playing dress up or model UN. They're welcomed as a next generation of entrepreneurship pool. And
Yeah.
I want to make sure we're talking not only about the math of the capital deployment, which is very, very real. And there's a bunch of reporting that we can show that we are just not investing locally at the rate we should, but
Yeah.
also the attitudes
Yeah.
surrounding that. Is
Yeah.
that
No,
fair?
no, I agree. Now, you know, some people go, well, the market is largely there. Well, you can do that from afar anyways. So, but you're absolutely right, is that when you have concentration, and particularly in Silicon Valley, we have concentration of of experienced folks, capital, etc. There is a perception, and I think it's real in many cases, of there just less barriers on there. But what's interesting, Doug, though, this very feeling uh, hit its peak in 2005. And when after Canada suffered the com crash, and it was horrible. The United States started to recover around 2005 and 2006 in particular. Canada never did. And then we got another kick in the gut with the financial crisis. So in 2009, when I lobbied to remove that tax issue, it's because there was no VCs in Canada. When I say no, there was none.
Mm.
And all of the capital was largely coming from across the border, and yet we had this stupid rule. And it was so bad, and people were just saying out of universities, we're leaving. There's no hope here.
Yeah.
That is the reason why I left my job at Deloitte, and I had a really senior job, and people thought I was absolutely nuts. And I went to Omer's because no one was doing it, and I just felt like a jackass. Here I am saying, guys, we got to do that, and I didn't back it up, so I
You're
quit
not
my
actually
job.
deploying capital yourself.
Yeah,
You're
and
part of the
people
problem.
thought it was like a crazy amount. And that's for a different topic. I am feeling like, and then the next decade was the most unbelievable decade for capital in Canada. And, and it just started when COVID hit, it feels like to me, we're getting back into 2009. So it is fixable. It really is.
Well,
but we gotta focus in. It's a real problem.
It's important that you're noting that it is fixable, because we've had those errors before. We're going to very soon have another episode of the podcast where we're going to talk about the current state of Canadian venture and how much fixing is required. But going back to your other point of just 2005 being the peak of that diaspora feeling, I want to maybe say that we might be at a new peak. We reported on this last year. It's something that it's been etched into my mind, noting that only about a third of Canadian high potential startups, those are companies that have raised more than $1 million USD, created in 2024, were still headquartered in Canada in 2025. And of those, 2/3 companies that have fled, about half of them were now located in the US. So we have beyond, the wonderful sentiments of Nain and other young founders that we've spoken to have been writing so much about what they're feeling, why they're leaving, and what they're not getting here. This is being backed up in the data. And I'm wondering, when we talk about why Combinator not mattering, but what's allowing them to do this or reinforce this mattering, I want to break down the impacts of this. Beyond the fact that we're losing a generation of entrepreneurs, there is this component of we're also losing ownership of the capital creation and the value, right? Like Jesse Rogers, former Volta CEO, he's the Builders Club founder, former Velocity director, said it doesn't really matter where the company is domiciled. It matters way more who owns the company,
correct,
where the ownership
Absolutely.
value is on the cap table. And if we are creating a generation of founders, one example, Eric Mijakovsky, founder of Pebble, who used to work at Y Combinator, has basically lived in the States for 15 years because he was pulled down to that. Now did a lot of great work connecting with University of Waterloo founders as well, because he was a University of Waterloo grad. Seeing a whole generation of founders at that tier go down is going to be a problem. Jesse Rogers also said that saying the YC data is wrong or politically motivated is untrue or ignoring the reality that we live in, because many of our country's best founders, and I'm quoting now, leave before they ever hit a local VC's radar. U.S. firms like Contrary and programs like The Residency are actively pulling top Canadian talent south, offering them better capital, networks, and opportunities. Meanwhile, Canada's startup ecosystem is running at a decade-old playbook. I think we were just talking about that, failing to keep up with what young, high-agency builders want. The result, Canadian VCs see great founders, but only a fraction of the total potential. He's framing this as people who are saying this doesn't matter, has no impact on the Canadian ecosystem are wrong. But the reasons why he's saying it sound a lot like the reasons why you were saying this is concerning. Are we all talking around the same issue from different perspectives?
We are, but I think that's phrasing it incorrectly. The reason why I say YC doesn't matter, because they would otherwise, there'd be 5 companies in that cohort. We're certainly not talking about 5 companies. We're talking about what you just said, the dozens and dozens or hundreds, I don't know what the right data is, that might be going to the United States. They're not going to Y Combinator. They're just going to the United States and raising capital there. It just doesn't happen to be Y Combinator. And Y Combinator is taking a tiny amount of those. It's the general issue. And I am deeply concerned on that. Like I said to you, I only watch the kids. I watch what the kids are doing and thinking. That's where I'm sensitive. And again, let me give you even, and those are the young kids, but even let's talk about the more mature, like we just got the massive news of Wabi, right?
Yep.
I love what she's doing, Raquel Erdizan. And out of the $3 billion now valuation or whatever it is, but $1 billion of capital, I understood that 97% of that number was non-Canadian. Okay. And so the problem with someone like Raquel, who loves Canada, but is an immigrant herself, she's under pressure with them saying, what the hell are you doing in Canada?
Who spoke very articulately at Toronto Tech Week last year about why Canada is a much better place and safer place for her to be and for her employees to be.
Correct.
Building a physical AI company and having to go elsewhere for capital. We saw this in additionally, like you just look in the AI space where all the heat and the action is, Tenstorrent redomiciled. You're looking at companies like Xanadu.
Yeah, he was under pressure.
An all-Canadian round.
I know, couldn't get anything
public via SPAC because couldn't find the capital here, which is going to put other pressures, similar to like we saw with D-Wave, to reincorporate in the US because investors of publicly traded companies have no motivated interest in where the company's domiciled, only where the returns are being driven.
Correct.
Right? So you're right. This isn't just an early stage thing. This is across the board.
And Doug, what's the problem with these ones? These are already now. These are the proven success stories. They still have a long way to go. But, interestingly, you asked me this question before, why did I form Mavericks? Was to cut these big checks because it was a hole in the market. That's why I invest in Kepler and Myovision. They would have been under pressure to migrate out, trying to keep these here, but I can't do that unless folks are doing that at the earliest stages to set me up so I can hit the monster check, right? So I need that pool in here. And, I'm going to live here and die here, and I'm trying to get the capital. And as I'm raising my, current next fund, I'm actually spending now a lot of time raising capital, even from U.S. players, to bring it into Canada. These are the things that we need to do so that I can use that money. But to your point, the challenge with that is the gains from that accrue outside of Canada. but
Yeah.
Canada is capital constrained. I am trying to convince all of the pension funds, etc., put the money in so that the spoils of it goes back to Canada and stays in Canada. That is the strategy that we need, but right from pre-seed all the way to the late stage where I come in.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, sir, is that you completely disagree with Harley Finkelstein. Print that, tweet it. No,
Harley's going to punch me in the face. No.
But to that point, when Harley's saying that Y Combinator is formalizing what's inevitable, not causing it, we're all talking around this idea of the real issue here isn't Y Combinator making a change. It is a culture of Canadian entrepreneurs not being able to build here, going somewhere else. And, for everyone making,
that's what he's saying.
In the same way, Y Combinator is making the best choices for them. All these founders are making the right choices for themselves as well. I got to work at Research in Motion, Canada's largest tech company. I got to grow and learn and build here, and I decided to stay here. If I was 25, 27 now, I don't know if I would make the same decision for very, very good reasons. That's a problem. And
that's a problem
for the capital reasons, for the cultural reasons. And then as Jesse's noting here, for the ownership reasons, if we continue to be the talent pool of the world and never capture the value, we've got some sovereignty issues going on right now.
Correct.
So maybe if we're to say the reason why we're talking so much about Y Combinator, even if their decision doesn't matter too much, the marketing and the messaging and the reinforcement of the larger issues is a problem for young founders who are hearing, you got to go. It'll be great for you if you go. Maybe not for the right reasons.
Maybe not for the right reason. And they're not doing it for you. They're not doing it for you.
But there are still real reasons underneath.
But there's a problem in Canada for sure. That's what Harley was referring to. He was kind of saying the same thing as me. Hey, whatever they're doing, it's not mattering anything, but these kids are leaving, and they're leaving for the reasons that we just stated. And we got to fix those if we want to stop them from leaving. Who cares about YC or not?
Because no one should blame an entrepreneur or founder for making the right decisions for them personally or for their company, right? We want
that's why
a structural opportunity to allow for something different. Okay,
correct. That's why I said I'm sad if they make that decision, but I'm more upset when Canada is not responding to it.
Yeah. There is another component to this, sir, and I've been waiting for it as we close off this conversation to ask you of it, because I want it to not get lost in the mix of all the very understandable ecosystem reasons, the financial reasons, the legal and tax reasons. I think we parsed through that in detail in a way that's very understandable. I'm going to read you something that Swish Goswami posted, works at Toronto company Bordy, that resonated with me and relates to a question that I wanted to ask the minute I knew you were going to be on the podcast. So this is what Swish said about the Y Combinator decision. I'll note off the top, he was kind of like, yeah, Y Combinator can do whatever they want, blah, 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 blah. Every founder should make their own decision, blah, 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 blah. They've chose to build and be in Canada. Everyone can make the right choice for them. But here's what he said. What's strange is the timing. This decision comes during a tense political moment between Canada and the US, at a time when many of us are actively encouraging founders to build and stay in Canada. And I want to go back to something that Trump said January 7th, 2025, when, Canada really woke up to what was going on, and, elbows up and sovereignty are part of the daily national discourse, where Trump was asked if he would use military force to annex Canada. I can't believe I'm saying that out loud, but it was a real question put to him. And he responded saying he would use economic force. My question to you is, why Combinator exerting economic force on Canada in this moment? And are they doing it because of any Trump-related pressures?
That's a great question. I mean, and I don't know, but I didn't go there. Where I was disappointed with Garry was being Canadian, and given this geopolitical nonsense that's going on, you'd think he might say, you know what, people might take this the wrong way. because I don't think it's a reaction to it. But what if we said, "Hey, founders, if you go down and into the valley, you just better be careful if you see ICE vehicles roaming around, and you're not you're of the wrong color or what have you."
A lot
Can
of these
you
crack
imagine?
Canadian founders have exactly the skin color and the nationality that in 2016, 2017, Trump was trying to deport and
Right.
ban from traveling, and
Correct.
now ICE is actively targeting. I think that is something,
Correct.
and I'm not
So
saying that as a pro
I
Canada. I'm saying that as a public safety consideration for Canada's young entrepreneurs. That if you are traveling to the
correct.
United States and you don't look like me, but hey, white men and white women in Minnesota are dealing with you are putting your health and safety in danger
Right.
right now.
So can you imagine what backlash we would get if we said that? I wouldn't, but Americans are saying that right now, but we didn't, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not stupid in doing that, because that would escalate already a point of tension. And the reality is, we should be calming this down. So I just think, and this is why I kept on saying, dude, the narrative, you're wrong, you're dead wrong in your data, but your narrative that already there's this underlying concern of exodus that we're having for valid reasons amongst a geopolitical catastrophe, and you do this now. Come on, guys, give your head a shake.
Okay.
And for fuck's sakes, you're Canadian, dude. Like, you forgot that a little bit. Did somebody not just remind you on that? And I think that's what it is. Ultimately, they're doing what's good for their business, and I have zero issue on that. But you're absolutely right. Life is timing. And this timing, people did react that way. I didn't believe on it, but some people do, because you just used terrible timing to actually codify it, even though you kind of were operating like this in the last 2 or 3 years
Okay.
anyway.
So you're not saying it's necessarily being caused by Trump. You're not
I don't
saying
believe
it's
it.
politically
I don't believe
motivated,
it.
but you're
I
also
don't believe it.
saying it, it doesn't behoove Canada right now to frame it in that way, which I think is interesting.
Can I tell you that two members of parliament who who are the innovation community knows for sure, did send me a note after reading that and said that was a very good message. And my retort's going to be, we got to fix this,
Okay.
because it's the underlying issues that we can't let go, and that's the issue.
Okay. I don't want to push you too hard, and obviously it's analysis or speculation as to the how much the Trump effect is waterfalling down on this stuff. I also don't want to push you too hard on whether or not it is the smart thing to do to not address whether this is targeted economic force on Canada. But I will acknowledge for our audience just that even the idea that we have to do that cost benefit analysis speaks to where Canada is
Yeah.
in its relationship with the United States in 2026. And that's something that we can't walk by. So I appreciate your candor
Yep.
on that. I want to close this then, because we're talking about the really real underpinning issues that are impacting Canadian entrepreneurs in this Canadian startup diaspora. And then we're talking about uh, inaccurate marketing or messaging that's not helping. Let's provide some counterfactuals here, sir. Let's talk about when it comes to Canadian startups considering reincorporating, and we're not talking about setting up, a U.S. incorporated structure for as you expand internationally, you get the tax benefits. We're talking about flipping the script on where your home domiciled is.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that founders should keep in mind that aren't made up statistics related to performance benefits,
Right.
that founders can think about when they're being told by Canadian incubator, or when they're being told by US incubators and accelerators and investors that they should do this and it's best for them? what they might be missing if they don't keep their CCPC status, Canadian controlled private corporation.
Sure. So, I outlined three things, and maybe there's more, but three major things. Number one is, so if you are a founder that says, I want to build in Canada for the reasons that you choose, but okay, fine, I will create a US co as the top parent company, you blow away your capital gains exemption for Canada. So you will be taxed like any other capital gains on the disposition of your shares, and you don't get the QSBS benefits either. So you get nothing, number one. Number two, Canada has some very favorable rules for your employees as it relates to the taxation of employee stock options. They're very favorable if it's a Canadian-controlled private company. That is blown away.
Yes, because you're not just doing structural and tax planning for the cap table. If you care about your employee base too, that can have dramatic impacts.
Yeah. So you've hurt your own employees. And the third thing here, this is the funny one. So this is why I kept on saying, remember, it doesn't matter with US VCs, but you say angels. And again, what quantum of dollars are we talking about? Well, we have a lucrative program. The US has their own program, but it's not lucrative at all. It's the R&D tax credit program, or the SHRED. And if you are a CCPC, you get two things that are major. You get an enhanced credit that's more than double the base credit rate. But more importantly, it's a refund in cash. You don't have to be profitable.
Refund in cash that you can get up front if you apply properly, right? You don't necessarily have to wait on the back end for that. Yeah.
Free non-dilutive capital. So again, this is where I was poking at what kind of angel dollars are you talking about? So if you said, for example, hey, I can get $1 million US like this, and I'd say, but you can get $1 million US like this too through the SHRED program, and you give nothing away.
Yeah.
What would you pick? I know what I would, right? So it is a very good source of non-dilutive financing. Now, if you say, no, but I want to scale to $20 million, like I said, if you want those sorts of checks, if you want a $20 million check, you have to go to the US VCs who don't give a shit about the domicile in the first place. So those three things are an example of, just know what you're giving up before you make that rash decision.
And know that these organizations and all VCs, and we spend a lot of time at BetaKit talking to VCs as spokespeople for the industry a little bit, because they have a lot of things to say, and they're usually very, very smart people, but it's often framed in what's beneficial for them, because they're at the end of the day asset managers, and they need to generate a return. And if you are a founder that aren't thinking through the reasons why, the people telling you why these things are good might also be good for them, you're not doing your due diligence, right? Now, all the things that John just laid out doesn't change a lot of the cultural issues that we addressed as well, which is why, and John, we didn't talk about this, but I wanted to lay it out and close here. You've committed to investing $25,000 into every listener of the BetaKit podcast who consumes this episode. Just send an email to John Ruffalo at Mavericks, and he's just going to send you $25K, and we're going to get the speed of capital deployment going back again. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, that's right. And then I'm going to redirect that over to BetaKit. So,
oh God,
but I would love, and I'll tell you though, those that are looking to scale up their businesses, we are dying to deploy this capital on Canadian founders on here, and that's our priority. We are a Canada First fund. We're not a Canada only fund, but we're proudly Canada First. I'm in the old timers club now here. I'm not doing this for me anymore. I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for my future grandkids, etc. I do think that Canada is the greatest country in the world. I believe that, but we better act like it before we lose so much of our great talent.
Okay. Well, John, I really appreciate that every time we need to pull that emergency lever, you're around to have a conversation.
Right.
Appreciate that you have been jumping in and not only writing about this, but actually engaging with the principals. And then I think, probably need to have you back on to talk through some of the other venture considerations at some point, because there's a lot of solvable problems and opportunities
there is
in Canada.
Everything,
deal with
everything's solvable. It's all solvable if we want it.
Okay. Thanks, John. Really appreciate the
time.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Doug.